Well, let's get down to business, shall we? So today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing a presentation on the history of tattoos and more from our dear friend and neighbor, very local, very literal, Awen Briem. And Awen has been tattooing or an apprentice for tattoo artistry since 1993 and a studio owner since 2001 and recently moved his studio to Ely, I think like 4 years ago.
Yep.
So we are very fortunate to be able to learn about tattooing from our local friend and expert, Awen Briem. Please join me in welcoming Awen to the podium.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out and having an interest in learning about tattooing. Um, I got interested in tattooing because of its history. And so whenever I have the opportunity to speak about it, I like to share that history because I think that that's really been lost, especially in our American culture. So it's going to be a very brief, quick ride in like 35 minutes through 7,000 years of history. So we're just going to touch on a few key points that have always stuck out to me and that I've always nerded out about and found interesting. Um, a little bit just in way of introductions. My partner Kit and I moved here 4 years ago. Um, we'd been talking about moving to Ely for a couple decades and trying to figure out the timing and everything to do that. And as it happened, COVID, the uprising in Minneapolis, and our need for peace and uh, some healing time after that all kind of came together. Kit had the opportunity to work remotely, and I decided to take the leap and see how the shop would do here. So that's kind of how we got here in a nutshell. I was in uptown Minneapolis for, let's see, since 2001, so about 22 years. I had my studio there at the corner of Lake and Lindale. Um, Prior to that, I worked in two different studios, one in Minneapolis and one in St. Paul. I apprenticed at the studio in Minneapolis for 5 years. That was a one-on-one apprenticeship over that period of time, at which point I got licensed, and then a couple of years later opened my own studio. Um, the way that we initially discovered Ely and became attached to the community here is that I started volunteering at the International Wolf Center in 2003 on the wolf care staff. And from 2003 until we moved here in 2022, I had been making the trip up here for anywhere from 2 to 7 days every 4 weeks for that whole period in order to maintain a social bond and relationship with the wolves. So it was really nice to get here and not do that anymore and just stay. And during our time in Minneapolis, we were there for 31 years and we loved Minneapolis. We lived in Uptown. Uptown is like a little cool bohemian city inside of the city. We lived there when you'd see Prince riding his bike around Uptown and going in and out of his store and going in to get his hair done or buy a guitar. Um, so it was kind of the good old days when Uptown was like funky and it was all small, privately owned, family owned businesses and they were all really unique. And then gentrification started to happen. And we started to lose that. We got big box stores, rents went up, storefronts started to empty out. A couple years later, COVID hit. Obviously, everybody knows how devastating that was for a lot of businesses. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Floyd was murdered, which was about a mile and a half from my Minneapolis shop and less than a mile from where we lived. So we were very much in the center of the uprising when that began. And then, of course, the trial a year later. So over that period from like 2020 to 2022, when we moved up here, we were living amid drones constantly, helicopters shaking the windows of our house constantly, the National Guard, Hummers, white supremacists armed, walking the streets and causing issues, all kinds of turmoil. So it was a good time for us to leave. And we were thrilled to be here. I think we'll always have deep gratitude to the Tierney family for working with us so positively and enthusiastically so that we could steward their homestead and live there and take care of the land and the house. Um, So we are now located 7 minutes outside of Ely. The tattoo chair has a view of the forest, which is much better than the brick wall it had before. And my clientele is about 50% local and 50% folks that travel in. So I was trying to calculate, I would say on average about a dozen people a month, year-round minimum, travel into Ely, stay overnight, eat at restaurants. And so I'm really happy that it's not only worked out as far as my business goes, but that there's some additional support in that traffic to other businesses in town. And those clients tend to come from the Twin Cities. I've also had folks travel in from Chicago, Maryland, and as far as London to Ely. In Minneapolis, I had other folks coming in from other states and countries as well, but I was impressed with folks being willing to fly into Duluth and drive up to Ely. So that's been really cool. I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, just in the way of educating around tattooing in the modern day, we are constantly as an industry working to educate people that we are professionals, that we are highly trained, and that we have deep resumes of that education and that training. So just to hit a few, I'm doing the math, 6 years in a row, my shop in Minneapolis was recognized as one of the best tattoo shops in Minneapolis. The last year that was the case was the year that I left and moved up here. I was featured in a book called 101 Places in the Twin Cities That You Must Not Miss. That was fun. I am a professional member of the Alliance of Professional Tattooists and have been for 26 years. I'm certified in the prevention of disease transmission in tattooing. I was a state representative for the Alliance of Professional Tattooists, the APT, from 2006 to 2024, and the APT recognized me with the designation of Master Tattooist in 2005. So those are just some highlights. I've done a couple of other presentations, again, as you'll see, History of Hip series at the Minnesota History Center, Brief History of Tattooing, A Constant in History, the Memorial Tattoo, both with Dr. John Troyer, who's a friend and a client. He's the director of the Center for Death and Society in Bath, England. I've worked on 2 feature films doing temporary tattoo work for, on the artists. That was before they just digitalize and stick it in there. But that was fun. Some still photography work, again, with temporary tattoos for ads, one with the Department of Public Safety and one with Victory Motorcycle. And then I had the opportunity to do a cover for a friend of mine's blues band album, so that was fun too. So history, as I mentioned briefly, tattooing, as I mentioned briefly before, has a long history. It's dated back to at least 7,000 years. And we see tattooing in virtually every culture across the world. If you look back far enough, it's there. So just to quickly run through this list, and we're just, like I said, today going to hit on a couple of these cultures, but Anatolia, Scythian, Pazyryk people, Polynesia, pre-Columbian cultures of Peru and Chile, ancient Egypt, the Maori people of New Zealand, the Picts from northern Scotland, multiple Native American tribes in North America, Japan, Tibet, Samoa, and of course the Tahitians, which is where we've got the word that we know currently as tattoo, came from the Tahitian word tatau. In the photos that I pulled, this picture, ooh, fancy. This picture here is an Egyptian mummy where the skin is intact and you can see the tattoos. This is a traditional Japanese style back piece. This is a Tibetan pilgrim on a pilgrimage during which they pray, meditate, and obtain tattoos. And then this is a feminine Polynesian leg sleeve that's very traditional and sacred, and the male version of the leg sleeve. So we go back to 5300 BC, which is the oldest confirmed evidence of tattooing that we have found currently, is Otzi, the Iceman. 2 hikers, if you can imagine, were hiking in the Swiss Alps, and walking along, talking to each other, and they look down and they see a body. So they call whatever the equivalent is there of 911. And when they get there, they're like, we don't do this. This is old. But he was so well preserved, including clothes, tools, belongings, that they thought it was a hiker that had succumbed and, was a current situation. Um, so Utsi is a glacial mummy from the Copper Age. Like I said, he's been carbon dated back to 5300 BC, and he has 61 tattoos. I mean, 61 that we can see, but his skin was virtually perfectly intact. He was so intact that they've been able to research his stomach contents. They figured out the cause of death. I mean, it's incredible. So, and he has his own wing of a museum in South Tyrol, Italy. So if anybody ever makes it to Italy, that's on my bucket list. I think that could be a good business trip, right? Um, but he has an entire section of the museum dedicated to his life and the research and the information that we're learning from him. So I couldn't resist putting one of the typical questions or statements that tattooed people hear almost all the time, which is, you're really going to regret that when you get older. But Utsi lives on, so I don't think he's too sad about it. I pulled this from the website for the museum. Up at the top again, it says that he has 61 tattoos. They have most of them indicated, if you can, hopefully it's big enough that people can see. All of the tattoos are lines or crossed lines. And what's interesting is because they're all lines and crossed lines, they don't seem to be decorative. Most of them were under the clothing that he was wearing or would have been wearing. And the first thing they learned when they started to examine him was that he had chronic injuries every place that he was tattooed. So, this paragraph here on the left, adornment or therapy. Scientists are still puzzled about the significance of the tattoos. It is assumed that the tattoos serve therapeutic powers. They're all located at sites on the body with considerable wear and tear that were probably painful. It is therefore believed that the tattoos were made in a bid to soothe pain. This theory is supported by the location of the tattoos on acupuncture lines that are still used today. So there is current research going on that is suggesting some strong correlations between early tattooing and early acupuncture, and that the tattoos were a byproduct of the acupuncture rather than intentional to have a tattoo. So you poke an herb in on those meridians for healing, and it leaves an indelible mark. So clearly, at some point after that, somebody was like, "Hey, I have an idea." So we jump ahead some time. Oh, wait, there's a recreation of Utsi. That's at the museum. And here I blew up a couple of the pictures. Oops, wrong way. So here you can see some of the back tattoos, and right here, which I blew up here. And then on his wrist, it's dark, so it's very hard to see. There's a partial band around his wrist, kind of going onto his hand. And then, of course, most of the rest were on his legs or on his front. So jumping ahead in some time, we're looking at 2,500 years ago now. And there was another permafrost preserved body found who is known as the Siberian Ice Maiden. They believe that she was a princess among the Pazyryk people in Altai in Russia. Again, she was impeccably preserved, and her body was draped in silk, accompanied by two warriors who were also tattooed, and they were buried with 6 horses that were very meticulously arranged in a radial pattern. And given what that would have meant at that time, all of those things, including the tattoos, are recognition of her status as a high-standing person. To have 2 warriors with you, 6 horses, and the full adornment that she had. So this tattoo, I keep doing the wrong button. This tattoo right here is on her shoulder, her deltoid, right there. And it's some type of illuminated griffin. This is a reproduction of the design. So again, another question that tattooed people get asked, what will you do when you get old and wrinkly? These are recreations of the two warriors that were interred with her and some of their designs. So you can see how extensive the designs are. Here's some designs blown up a bit larger, and then here's a couple elements. And these images included leopards, stag, rooster, and a mythical half lion, half eagle creature. Jumping ahead a bit more in time, and I included these guys because they are some of my ancestors, so I have a strong connection to them. These are the Pictish people. They're from primarily Scotland. Some people mention some other areas geographically close to that, but basically in Scotland. They were named the Picts because people called them um, Julius Caesar actually wrote that they were the pictorial people who pricked diverse marks into their skin. Pictish tattoos, however, were not only decorative. The woad, W-O-A-D, is the product that they used for the pigment, and it had a bluish tint. It came from, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it came from a plant known as Isatis tinctoria, which is an antiseptic. So again, while it was clear that they were indeed tattooing specific images and designs on themselves, they also could rub the woad onto their skin, go into battle, get injured, and there's already an antiseptic there. So that was something that they knew worked and trusted and made extensive use of. Um, Two other things, just kind of as fun side note, since they are people that I feel a strong connection with and descend from. They used lime paste in their hair to make it stand up. And so like this image here is not wind. It's representative of the lime paste. And he wanted a wild hairdo that was like stiff and would stand up. And then they would go into battle unclothed with lime paste in their hair, playing war horns and beating war drums. And I just imagine these people in mass running over a hill to whatever army they're fighting. And there's multiple writings of how terrifying that was to those folks. So I'm like, respect. This photo, I just think it's interesting too. This photo or painting is from 1585. And this painting is from 1857. And if you take a peek at some of these designs, you'll see something similar to this at the end in terms of these spirals. So at this point, we're seeing that over at least 7,000 years, tattooing has consistently been earned as a rite of passage, a recognition of social status or cultural status, a modality of emotional healing, a modality of physical healing, worn as a talisman for protection, whether personally and internally or whether going into war or other difficult situations. An affirmation of warrior spirit, which in indigenous cultures circles less around, quote unquote power and more around courage, service, selflessness, and discipline. And an acknowledgement of identity, heritage, your tribe or group. Moving a bit forward in history, in the Victorian 19th century, Britain's Prince of Wales, later became King Edward VII, obtained a tattoo during an 1862 trip to Jerusalem. His sons, Prince Albert and Prince George, were tattooed with dragons in Japan around the same time. And this was a significant turning point at which tattoos became a fashion statement for socialites. And it became a big thing with monarchies. There's multiple other monarchs following that obtained tattoos in their travels. So then moving forward again, by the 1900s, tattoos had made their way into public culture in the United States by way of sailors. Sailor Jerry Collins is perhaps one of the most famous and earliest tattoo artists. His work is very prevalent today. I'm sure you recognize some of these images because people enthusiastically seek these out still. Sailor Jerry was tattooing like 1900 to 1930s, somewhere in there. Um, these are all his images. These are nautical stars. These would represent to the sailors who are wearing them and to people who choose them today, direction, navigate your way through life. Of course, sailors would be honoring people that they're missing or loved ones that they've lost. We have ships, which would represent adventure, not only going on adventure, but returning home safely. Obviously, well-known American eagle. This is a tattoo I did on the chest of a young officer before he was deployed. So he got that as a talisman for protection. And this one I think is less well known, but it's also particularly interesting because while each one has a specific meaning, some of these you had to earn to wear. And so again, we see this 7,000-year-old mindset of tattoos as significant pieces that you earn rather than a decorative thing you get because it's fun. The shellback turtle shows the sailor's experience at sea. You could only get it once you crossed the equator. And the longer someone had spent at sea, the more tattoos they were permitted to get. So again, the more work you put in, the more committed you are, the more you participate in whatever your community is, the more you earn the right to wear the ink. The Mumbabatak are tattooists, a tattoo community in the mountains in the Philippines. This is Apo Huang Od Oge. She is 109 years old. She's the oldest known tattoo artist still working. And as of March, she was still tattooing. So as far as I know, she's still going strong. Um, it's a pilgrimage to see her. You have to fly to the Philippines, drive, walk, hike through the mountains, and get there, and then hope that she'll agree to tattoo you. Mumbabatak means master tattooist, and this is a matrilineal tradition in Buscalan, which is their village. So she learned from her mother and her aunties, and she is currently apprenticing several of her nieces who are continuing the tradition. Needless to say, here we have a little bit of the confluence of old and new, history and modern, right? Like people today want to get a tattoo. They love the idea of an adventure like this. Yet they're tattooing traditionally. You don't make an appointment. You don't decide what you're getting. They decide what you're getting if they decide to tattoo you. It's a gift, and it's an honor. It's not something that you arrange for and control. These two signs are in Buscalan village, and I think this is a great segue into how the negative stereotypes that we think of tattooing today, this is the transition into the colonialism that kind of informs that. So kind of right where the arrow is They've written, please observe and respect the privacy, personal time, and traditions of the artists and the community. The Mbabatak can be overwhelmed with so many people wanting the art. It takes a long time to travel here, but this does not entitle you to demand anything. Tradition dictates we are all equal. Do not disrespect this value. Everyone has to get in line for their turn, locals, foreigners, celebrities, government officials. Please do not insist to be ahead of the line. If you cannot wait, then you do not deserve this rare work of art. Everyone should be a guardian of Bouskolan to preserve this national treasure. And pick up all your garbage, don't be rude, all the other stuff. So that kind of transitions us into colonialism and how that's affected tattooing. 7,000 years of sacred ceremony behind this craft. And we start to see things like these. These are a couple of examples that are specific. The way that these examples played out and the mentality behind them is the same in multiple cultures. So I picked two. But it's a consistent thing when you look at all of the different cultures and how tattooing was colonized through each of them. So on the left, we have two photos of Maori people from New Zealand. They wear a sacred tamoku, which is the facial tattooing. Again, that is very sacred, done only with ceremony, earned, and done by the medicine person or the sacred leader in their tribe. With the whole tribe around, it's a very significant thing to get the tamoku. For hundreds of years, and this has been, I don't even know how long it goes back, but it goes back a really long time. But for hundreds of years, the tattooed heads of Maori chiefs and warriors were sought after collector's items. Due to the European demand, a new trade developed, and Maori people were killed specifically for the purpose of collecting their tattooed head. The sacred tamoku was desecrated. My friend and client, Dr. John Troyer, who I mentioned I did those other presentations with, he's the director of the Center for Death and Society, so he kind of works with all things death. I just call him Dr. Death most of the time. He was in a museum in the UK, and he asked, what is that? And they said it was a head, and he said, you can't have that. So he's been involved in repatriating the remains of the Maori ancestors back to New Zealand and the Maori people ceremonially. That's still going on, but in the meantime, the Maori people have resumed doing the tamoku and are starting to wear it again, which is great to see. Another example is, of course, during the Holocaust, the imprisoned were tattooed with serial numbers. Tattoos in the Holocaust had three distinct functions: to mark and humiliate prisoners, to prevent their escape, and to expedite the identification of corpses already stripped of their uniforms, particularly following mass killings or deaths. And here's her numbers. Both of these cases obviously also dehumanize people, right? Make them neutral somehow. So that's very significant. So when you weaponize something, you are trying to gain power over other people. And from that, other people start to believe what's being said about the people that you're trying to gain power over, right? So we have these negative stereotypes. As with other indigenous practices of healing and empowerment, tattoos were manipulated and used against the wearers by using them to, without consent and without ceremony, mark criminals, the enslaved, prisoners, and anyone viewed as different in any way. As such, in colonized communities, the sacred practice of tattooing became normalized as the idea that people with tattoos are dangerous and worthy of social exclusion or being dehumanized. That idea held until surprisingly recently, and it is now starting to shift as people learn more about the craft and the people that wear the art. I used to have a t-shirt that said this, so I had to go find the sign. The only difference between tattooed people and non-tattooed people is tattooed people don't care if you're not tattooed. The cultural pressure to assimilate that we're experiencing today once again means that choosing to wear tattoos becomes historically significant. Reclaiming of bodily autonomy, self-expression, authenticity, and identity, and reconnection with those who came before us. Now we're moving into some images of work that I've done. These are all pieces that I've done. Diverse historical influences brought to the US from around the world inform the wide variety of design styles that we see today. And yet the reasons people wear them remain the same. These are some quotes from a few clients I asked to just share why they wear their tattoo. And these are all pieces that I've done. It is my way of expressing daring to be different from everyone else. Generally, all of my tattoos have a story behind them. They represent a part of me. My favorite thing about them, though, is they make me like my body better. This was actually a little conversation that happened, so I grabbed both pieces. Rich responded, I agree. I feel better about myself and wanted to show them off. I have a story about every element. They all have meaning. And part of it is that I have lived in a box most of my life. They represent me breaking out of that and being myself. The journey of pain and transformation was also very meaningful. They represent parts of my past I hope I always remember, and parts of my life that make me feel authentically myself. Transformation, autonomy, and ownership. So not only is tattooing internally transformative, but it can be externally, physically transformative as well. From paramedical tattooing, which includes reconstruction for breast cancer survivors and transgender people. Radiation, physicians use tattoo markings to target specific radiation treatments. Covering scars, we can tattoo over scars, whether those scars are from self-harm, injury, or surgical scars. This piece up here is a piece I did that's a 3D nipple reconstruction. That's becoming more and more popular and more supported by physicians because it's one less surgery, significantly less cost. After everything breast cancer survivors or trans patients have gone through, they don't need yet another invasive technique and weeks more of healing or pain medication. You can go in and get the tattoos, be done 3 hours later, 2 weeks later, you're healed. And this piece, this is a scar she had from childhood. And often, depending on the scar, I'll work it in. I've done tattoos of like, one guy had a very straight linear scar, so I did a zipper. So it looked like the scar was a zipper and it just made the tattoo look kind of 3D. Somebody else had a very linear scar and we made that into the quill of a feather. Other pieces, the scars are not quite that cooperative or linear to whatever they want to get, but you can tattoo over them once they're well healed. And that just helps people feel better, again, about their bodies, about their appearance. If those scars were traumatic, it helps heal some of that because they're seeing the tattoo now and not the scar every time they look in the mirror. I did not do this piece, but I have done these before. I just couldn't find the picture of the one that I did. People do use tattoos as a medical alert. If for some reason they can't wear a bracelet, they don't want to wear a bracelet, they're worried they're going to forget their bracelet, people will sometimes get whatever the medical alert is tattooed right on their wrist. where the bracelet would be. And there are people who get "do not resuscitate" tattooed on their chests. That's not a binding legal document. But our son is an EMT, and he has been caught in situations where he resuscitated someone and then found out afterwards that they had paperwork and that that was against their wishes. So if you have your paperwork, you could get that, and at least then whoever would be working on you would know to ask specifically what the person's wishes are and for that documentation. So it's just another interesting use of the art form. Then we move from personal well-being to collective well-being. Again, we think about earning the tattoo through the way you interact in your society or in your community. Courage, service, selflessness, discipline, and in support of your tribe, your clan, your group. So in today's world, this is a mural from Minneapolis, by the way, during the uprising. So in today's world, some examples of how I've seen that play out is this was a fundraiser I did for a little boy named Michael who was 11. He lived in North Carolina. He loved My Little Pony. He had a My Little Pony lunchbox, and the kids at school were relentless, terrorizing him about it. He asked for help. His parents asked for help. No help came. And one afternoon when Michael was home alone, he tried to end his life. He survived, but he didn't recover. And the tattoo community picked up on that pretty quick because we were like, nobody can tell you what you can like or what you don't like. And I like this quote from Jonathan. I think a lot of people in the tattoo community know what it's like to be ridiculed and judged. So this definitely touched me in that way. So tattoo studios from across the country held fundraisers for Michael's family, doing My Little Pony tattoos. Um, I offered to customize each one, so you can see lots of little variations, including Paul Bunyan and Babe. um, and nationwide, we raised $70,000 for Michael's family to help pay for medical bills, a van for transportation that he needed because he spent the rest of his life being wheelchair bound, um, and just kind of take a little bit of the edge off for them. During COVID, um, when our healthcare workers didn't have the PPE that they needed and production was behind and people were suffering, tattoo studios were closed. We weren't closed because we didn't know how to manage disease. We managed disease transmission every single day. But we were closed largely because we needed to get those protocols in place in order to make sure everybody was on the same page. So we needed some time to pause and get that organized. We also needed to pause using PPE so that they could be reprioritized, the people that needed it the most. So when I got I closed my studio a few days early because I was watching what was going on, and Kit and I talked about it, and I was like, let's just close and see what happens. And then 4 days later, we got the notice, you're closed. So that day, I packed up my truck with everything from the shop and took it to Hennepin County Medical Center and donated everything, masks, gloves, shoe coverings, drapes, all of it. And CNN picked that up and reported on it, and many, many other studios across the country did the same thing. No reason to sit there we were closed for 5 months, so no reason to sit there and have all that stuff wait when people needed it so desperately. Excellent. You're welcome. And then most recently, uh, although we've done this many times for many other different reasons, but mutual aid in Minneapolis and across Minnesota. Minneapolis tattoo artists raised funds by, again, doing fundraisers where artists offered different specific designs. In my case, I was focusing on the Rebel Loon. So we've done several Rebel Loons, and other artists did the Rebel Loons, and then many other specific designs that related to Operation Metro Surge in order to raise money for rental assistance, groceries, and legal fees for our neighbors. getting a little more technical now, what is required to tattoo in Minnesota? A professional license. Um, Historically, the tattoo industry and Minnesota health officials have collaborated extremely well together. We have a really good relationship. They listen because they don't know about tattooing. We listen to find out what their concerns are, what their lawyers are telling them needs to be in place so that ordinances and everything are complete and appropriate and enforceable. So that's been great. I helped write, worked with the health inspectors and health officials with the city of Minneapolis, the Department of Hennepin County, and the state of Minnesota to write each of those three different ordinances. And then I also helped create the ordinance that allowed the tattoo studios statewide to reopen during COVID. And then that was picked up by other states in the country and implemented there as well. We do have quarterly ongoing meetings of the industry with the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm missing one right now. But that's great because it gives us the opportunity to communicate, talk about new issues coming up, talk about what is working, what isn't working, what might need to be updated, whatever current events are on people's minds. So in Minnesota, since 2015, Minnesota tattooists have been licensed through the Minnesota State Department of Health. That's a good thing, and we worked hard for that. I think one thing that the health officials in the beginning of our conversations were surprised about was that the industry always wanted the regulations to be more strict than what the health department was asking for. Because we take it seriously and we understand what's at risk, and we value public health and we value our clients, and so we worked for years to get it passed on a statewide level. And the way that that finally happened was we collaborated with the blood banks. And once we had the blood banks on board, they would listen to us. Which means that you no longer have to wait to donate blood in Minnesota for a certain amount of time after you get a tattoo, which was previously the law. So in Minnesota, prior to the state, the reason it's good that it's through the state is because prior to that, it was based on each city or each county. And if your city or your county didn't have one, then there was like no holds barred. And the industry has been good, typically, about self-regulating. We have a long history of self-regulating, but it's also really good to have everybody on the same page and be really clear. So now that it's under the state, we have an establishment license, and then you have technician's license. So I have two, one for my business and one for me. If you have multiple artists, you have one establishment license, and then each technician has their own license. It's an 18-page ordinance, so I'm not going to read that all to you right now, but there's a number of requirements, obviously, that you have to fulfill. First and foremost, a formal one-to-one supervised apprenticeship with a minimum of 200 one-to-one supervised working hours, all documented, is required in order to demonstrate that you have the skills in order to be licensed professionally. Another key component, of course, is mandatory annual bloodborne pathogen training and annual continuing education. Again, to stay current with that, to be aware of what's going on, and to stay ahead of the curve. Amanda's making a special appearance here. Oh, I should say these photos, the one at the beginning, the black and white one of me working, and this photo of Amanda and I were both taken by the incomparable Brett Ross, so thank you for the images, Brett. Amanda consented to being featured in this slide. Professional tattoo artists are multi-skilled and continually refining required skills over time. A typical question that we get is, that tattoo that I want only takes 5 minutes. Why does it cost $100? Because we spend decades learning how to tear down, repair, rebuild tattoo machines, how to keep them tuned so they run properly, bloodborne pathogen training at least annually, and staying current by talking to the health department and being in touch, reading, researching, staying on top of the medical aspect of things, understanding skin as a medium as well as the process it goes through during healing. artistic development, particularly if you're doing custom artwork as an artist, design layout, visually, like any graphic designer, but also in 3D for fit and flow. Everybody's body's different, so you have to learn how to form fit things so that the tattoo is dynamic and alive and gives it that wow punch. You know, if you've ever seen a tattoo that you're like, wow, that's cool. Part of that was probably the fit and the flow, not just the tattoo itself. Deep listening and translation of ideas, meeting people where they're at. People come in with trauma, nerves, excitement, emotion. Could be anywhere from a fun tattoo because they love Pee Wee Herman to a memorial tattoo for someone that they love that they lost tragically 2 weeks ago. You know, so it's a wide range. You never quite know what's going to walk in the door. And you need to be able to meet people where they're at and hold that space and listen to them because sometimes they can explain what they want, sometimes they can't. So you have to be able to translate where they're coming from and what they need. Stewarding and protecting the history of the craft. Tattoo artists deeply value the history of this craft and the sacredness behind it. So we take that very seriously. Community building, developing trust and stewarding, I misspelled that, sorry, a safe space where everyone is welcome. That's important too. When people are entering something where they feel vulnerable and nervous, they need to know that it's a safe place and that they're going to be treated with dignity and respect. Everyone deserves that when they walk through the door. Photography, to document for your portfolio so that other clients can see what you're doing, but also as artists to document our work. Our work walks out the door. We don't have a collection of paintings or photographs. I can't print an extra one, you know, so like I finish it and I may or may not ever see it again. So that's an important way to document our work as well as, again, to preserve history. And then, of course, business, accounting, and marketing. And, oh yeah, the craft of actually applying the tattoo itself. Well, I mean, that's like the heart of it, right? But all of that other stuff, the tattoo is not going to happen if you can't manage all of those other things. Which is why the cost of a tattoo isn't based solely on the time and materials we use that day. It's based on decades of skill development, knowledge, and dedication that your artist has committed to this craft in order to facilitate a safe and transformative experience for you. Good tattoos aren't cheap, and cheap tattoos aren't good. So, kind of in summary, tattoos have maintained their significance for over 7,000 years. People get them for the same reasons they got them 7,000 years ago. For healing, processing grief, processing trauma, reclaiming bodily autonomy. For health, whether paramedical, radiation, or covering scars. For talismans, bringing strength, resilience, connection, protection. Warrior mindset, traditionally warrior mindset, meaning courage, service, selflessness, and discipline. Or identity, heritage, tribe, clan, or group. And earlier when we looked at the black and white picture of the Pict, I said just try to notice the spirals and remember that. This is a megalithic tomb passage at Knowth in County Meath in Ireland. And I don't know if you can see, I'll leave it up so if anybody wants to see closer. It's deeply carved with intricate spirals, and I've tattooed these, or some version of them, for my entire career. So that was like a pilgrimage for us to get there and see it, and they let me touch it, and I was really stoked. And then I do have links for some of the references just because I wanted to triple check dates and information and stuff like that. If anybody's interested, I can provide those to you. But we'll just leave it on this page. Thanks for your interest and thanks for coming.
Does anyone have any questions for Awen? Oh, lots of questions. Okay. I know, and if people need to leave at 1 o'clock, but we can hang out for a few minutes and ask questions.
I see that you have tattoos, of course. I assume that you didn't do most of them yourself, so it's hard to do that. But could you share about your tattoos and maybe tell us what they mean to you?
Sure, some of them because it would take a while to go over all of them. I have gotten tattoos from some different colleagues and friends, but I've also done quite a few of my own. Um, on my left arm, I'm in the process of a cover up with a new piece. So it's geometric and black work. It'll look better when it's all done. This piece, I have a bat. Um, I had a dog for 17 years that was a little Chihuahua mix, and he kind of looked like a flying fox bat. So I got that as a memorial for him. And then we have the Newgrange megalithic spirals in blue to honor the woad pigment from the Pictish people. Um, Higher up on my arm, I have a raven. I have a bunch of Celtic knotwork. My chest piece is Celtic. Lots and lots of knotwork going back to my heritage. Yeah. And I have a My Little Pony tattoo for Michael.
We saw quite a few slides of native art, native tattoo art, both historical examples and examples of work you've done. I'm curious, in this age of increasing awareness on cultural appropriation, how morality comes into your decision, if you ever have to say, you know, I'm uncomfortable giving that tattoo, or if you kind of hand all the decision making on the art and what it makes or the importance it means to your clients onto them and just say, that's not my deal. So I'm curious how you deal with that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's an ongoing dialogue in the tattoo community. I'd say that there is a vast amount of awareness of that and respect for that. Personally, I'm at the point in my career that I can vet clients before I agree. I work only by appointment. So people reach out to me and submit an inquiry with what they're interested in getting. And so that opens a conversation where I can ask questions about why they're interested in it, what they're thinking, what it means to them. And I do turn down pieces on occasion if it seems like it might not be a great situation. But usually, at least the people that I talk with have, they're honoring their own heritage or something that relates directly to what they want to get. One thing I'll add to that too right now is I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing currently actually is the conservative movement's stealing of Celtic art and Norse art, and the people who live in those communities overseas are horrified because that is in no way at all what any of those designs means. It's not where they came from. It's a total desecration of those images. So I always like to bring that up to people's minds that when you see these images on people doing particular things, they're desecrating, again, that aspect of this ancient art and the indigenous people that created those designs and wore them. Yeah. Apparently. So, on the other hand, there are also artists that are covering up white supremacist tattoos, racist tattoos, anti-Semitic tattoos for free. So it's a varied community, but there's responsibility there and there's self-regulation there. Yeah.
So somewhat related, a lot of thought and creativity goes into your work. Do you or others similarly situated seek to protect it through intellectual property rights? You said they walk out the door.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it's something that people struggle with as well because we created the design, energy, time, skill, and it's on their body. And often it's, at least in my case, it's their idea. I created it, but they brought me the idea. So I don't go through the technical legal process of doing that, but I do ask people to just be respectful. Like we collaborated on this, so let's respect that process and not try to monetize it or something like that. It's personal. Yeah.
You mentioned doing a tattoo in 5 minutes when you were talking about your pricing. What is the average length time it takes to do a tattoo?
Oh, that's a good question. That depends on the tattoo. I mean, even a really small 5-minute tattoo in the end takes an hour because the person arrives, we chat, we check them in. There's paperwork that the state requires them to complete. I check their ID to make sure they're of age, talk about their design, size it, stencil it, place it on them. They look in the mirror. We set up. There's this whole sterile process. And check-in process that happens. And then even if the tattoo is 5 minutes, we're 20, 25 minutes in, 5 or 10 minute tattoo if it's really, really small and simple. And then we talk about aftercare. We take a couple pictures. I take a couple pictures on their phone for them to share with their friends. We put a bandage on it. They pay. We say goodbye. So it's a relational business. It's not transaction based. So even a 5-minute tattoo is an hour. But that said, it depends on the tattoo. Like I would say typically what I book, I do mostly larger pieces. So typically I'm tattooing one person a day in a 5-hour appointment. You saw some of the size of some of those pieces, those are done in multiple sessions, but they're multiple long sessions. So how long it takes just depends on the tattoo itself.
Do you have a question?
I just had a question. You were talking about the picked people, they used a certain plant. Do you use traditional ink or are they all modern type inking? Or do you do any traditional, didn't the Maori use like little bone splinters to do the tattooing?
Yeah. I use electric machines. It's on my bucket list to get a Tabori tattoo sometime in my life, which is a hand poked tattoo, not like a hand poke, hey, let's have a 6-pack and do it at my house tonight, but like by a master who does it in the traditional way with, a little mallet and the bone. I would love to experience that. I feel like it would be really profound to sit there and like meditate while it's happening on the fact that people have done this for 7,000 years. Um, so there are some people who do that and preserve that, and I'm thankful for that. Most people use electric machines. And then as far as the pigment goes, the pigment should be made by and provided specifically for tattooing. There's good pigment and there's terrible pigment, which is part of why the knowledge and skills of a professional tattoo artist are really important to consider when you're going to get one. The really good pigment is made basically of mineral salts that bring the color, and then it's liquidized by alcohol or witch hazel or glycerin typically. So I purchase very high-end pigment and I look at pigment as I look at food. The fewer the ingredients, the better. And if I don't know what it means, I'm not going to use it on my clients.
All right, well, we'll wrap for this week. Thank you, Awen. We'll see you all next week.